Maylin did not cry when her father signed the paper. She had promised herself that much. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs, rough hands, scarred hands, hands that had hauled water and split wood and patched wagon boards since she was 9 years old, and she held absolutely still while he counted the money the stranger left on the table. $40. That was what Waylin decided his eldest daughter was worth. $40, and he didn't even watch the wagon pull away. If this story moves you, hit subscribe and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this valley reaches. The morning Maylin left the only home she had ever known, she carried everything she owned in a flour sack. One dress. One pair of worn boots with a cracked left sole. A small photograph of her mother dead 7 years now, the edges soft from handling. And a folding knife her mother had pressed into her palm the week before she passed, whispering in Cantonese that a woman alone in this country needed something with an edge. Maylin was 22 years old. She had never been further than 14 miles from Sutter Creek, California. And she was being sent to a man she had never met in a valley she had never heard of, because her father had run out of ways to lose money that didn't involve her. "You bring nothing to this household," Waylin had told her the night before, not unkindly, which was almost worse. He said it the way a man states a fact about the weather. "You are not delicate. You are not soft. No man in this town will take you for a wife, and I cannot keep feeding a girl who earns nothing." "I earn," Maylin said. "I earned every day this week. The Harmon stables, the stable work." He waved his hand. "Like a boy. You work like a boy. You think like a boy. You have no grace, Maylin. Your mother, God rest her, she had grace. You got her hands." He looked at those hands, rough and squared at the knuckles, and something passed across his face that might have been grief if he'd let it stay. He didn't let it stay. "A man named Hurst. He ranches up past the Calaveras Ridge. He paid in advance, which tells me he is desperate or he is simple. Either way, he will not complain. You are selling me. I am making an arrangement." "That is what selling is, father." Waylin looked away. "You leave at first light." The man who drove the wagon to collect her was not Caleb Hurst. He was a bow-legged, sun-dried fellow named Percy Dodd who chewed tobacco continuously and said approximately 9 words during the entire 4-hour ride into the foothills. The 9 words were, "Don't fall off. Road gets rough after the creek." Maylin sat in the wagon bed among grain sacks and a broken harness and said nothing back. She watched Sutter Creek disappear behind a stand of dry pines, and then she faced forward and kept her jaw set and breathed slow and steady, the way her mother had taught her, the way you breathe when something hurts more than you expected, and you refuse to let it show. The road did get rough after the creek. She didn't fall off. They were an hour past the ridge, the summer heat pressing down on everything like a hand when the wagon wheel cracked. Not bent, not loosened. Cracked clean through the whole left rear corner, dropping hard into the dirt and throwing Maylin sideways into the grain sacks with a force that split her lip against the wagon slat. Percy Dodd climbed down, looked at the wheel, took off his hat, put it back on, and said, "Well, damn." Maylin climbed down beside him, tasted copper, touched her lip, and crouched to look at the axle. "The wood's dry-rotted here," she said. "Should have been caught before we left." "Wasn't my wagon to inspect." "No." She straightened up and looked at the horizon. "How far to the Hurst property?" 4 miles, give or take." "Can the horse pull it on 3 wheels with the axle tied?" Percy looked at her sideways. "Lady, that ain't how. I know how a wagon works." She was already pulling at the harness straps. "Give me your rope." Percy gave her his rope. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't the work of an engineer. But Maylin had been fixing things her whole life because no one else in her father's household could be bothered, and she knew how weight distributed, and she knew how to bind and brace. 20 minutes later, the wagon was moving again, slow and listing, but moving. Percy Dodd chewed his tobacco and said nothing for another mile. Then he said, "Huh." Maylin took that as a compliment. Caleb Hurst's property announced itself with a wooden gate that needed rehanging. She noticed the hinge before she noticed anything else, and a long, flat stretch of summer brown grass that seemed to go on further than it should. There were cattle somewhere beyond a line of scrub oak. She could hear them low and distant. The cabin itself was small. That was the first thing she registered. Small, weathered gray, sitting at the base of a slope like it had been set down in a hurry and never properly situated. The porch had a missing board. The chimney had been patched with a different color mortar. She had expected poor. She had not expected this poor. Percy pulled the wagon to a stop and called out, "Hurst, got your delivery." Maylin felt her stomach turn over hard at the word delivery. She pressed her thumb against the edge of the folding knife through the fabric of her skirt and breathed slow and counted to 4. A man came around the far side of the cabin. He was taller than she'd expected, with the kind of lean that comes from work rather than scarcity shoulders that had carried heavy things for a long time. He wore a hat pulled down against the sun and a shirt that had been washed so many times the color was more memory than fact. He had a short dark beard going gray at the jaw, and when he pulled the hat up to look at the wagon, she saw his eyes. Gray. Quiet. The kind of eyes that were used to watching things from a long way off. He looked at Percy first. Then he looked at Maylin. She looked back. Straight on. She had decided before the wagon stopped that she would not look at the ground. Whatever this was, whoever this man was, she would look at him straight. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Percy, what happened to the wheel?" "Cracked out on the ridge road. She fixed it." The man's eyes moved back to Maylin. "You fixed it." "Well enough to finish the trip," she said. "It'll need proper repair before the wagon goes out again. The axle wood on the left side is compromised." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "I see." "Are you Caleb Hurst?" "I am." "My name is Maylin." She held his gaze. "I expect you already know that." "I do." He didn't move toward the wagon. He didn't offer his hand. He just stood there in the heat and looked at her with those gray watching eyes. "You hungry?" She hadn't eaten since before dawn. Her lip was still bleeding. She was sitting in a grain-dusty wagon in the middle of nowhere, having been sold by her own father for $40, and this man's first question was whether she was hungry. "Yes," she said. "Percy, get down and fix yourself some water from the pump before you go back." He looked at Maylin. "Miss Lin, if you'll come inside." She climbed down from the wagon without waiting for help. He watched her do it and didn't offer any. She appreciated that more than she could have explained. The inside of the cabin was as plain as the outside, but it was clean. Aggressively, precisely clean, the kind of clean that a man maintains alone when he has decided that disorder is a problem he can control even when nothing else is. There was a table, 2 chairs, a cook stove, a shelf with a few books she noted the titles without moving toward them, a rifle on the wall maintained with obvious care, a secondary shelf near the door with tools hanging in order of size. He set a plate in front of her. Salt pork and cold cornbread and a cup of well water. She ate without ceremony. He sat across from her and watched the middle distance, not her, while she ate. That surprised her. She'd braced for staring. "You don't have to figure out how to start," she said when she'd gotten through half the plate. "I'd rather we just say the plain of it." He looked at her then. "All right. My father made an arrangement with you. I don't know the particulars because he didn't see fit to tell me the particulars. I know there was money exchanged, and I know I'm here, and I know—" She paused, set her fork down. "I know I am not here as a guest." Hurst was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "you're not." "So what am I here as?" "I needed help running this place." He said it without flinching, which she gave him credit for. "The cooking, the housework. Someone steady. Your father said you were capable. He said I worked like a boy. He said you worked without complaint and could fix most things that broke." The gray eyes held hers. He didn't say much else. Maylin picked up her fork again. He didn't know much else. Hurst watched her eat. "You speak well," he said. It wasn't the way some people said it, slow and surprised, making it an insult dressed as a compliment. He said it the way he might note that the cornbread had turned out right. "My mother taught me English before she taught me anything else," Maylene said. She said in this country language was the first door. Everything else came after. "She sounds like a smart woman." She was. She took a drink of water. "She's been gone 7 years. He didn't say "I'm sorry" the way most people did reflexively, like it was a social tax to be paid. He just nodded once, slowly, the way a man nods when he takes something in and means to keep it. "I'll show you where you'll sleep after you eat," he said. "There's a storeroom off the back that I've put a cot in. It's not—" He paused. "It's not much. I've slept in worse. There'll be work starting at sunup. I won't pretend otherwise. I didn't come here expecting a holiday, Mr. Hurst." Another thing at the corner of his mouth. Still not quite a smile. "No," he said. "I don't reckon you did." The storeroom was small, and it smelled like dry grass and old leather, and something faintly resinous, like pine sap. The cot was narrow, but the blanket was clean. There was a hook on the wall, and a small square of mirror that had been set at an angle to catch the light from the one window. Maylin hung her flour sack on the hook. She sat on the edge of the cot. Outside, she could hear Percy Dodd's wagon rolling away down the track back toward the Ridge Road, back toward Sutter Creek, and her father's house, where her things would already be moved, her small space already absorbed back into the household, as though she'd never taken up any room at all. She took out her mother's photograph and held it in both hands. "I'm all right," she said quietly in Cantonese. She said it to her mother's face, and she said it to herself, and she said it because if she said it enough times, she might eventually stop needing to convince herself. "I am all right." She put the photograph on the floor beside the cot where she could see it. Then she lay down on her back, stared at the ceiling, and began making a mental inventory of everything she'd seen that needed fixing. The gate hinge, the porch board, the wagon axle, the chimney mortar, which might be purely cosmetic but might indicate something deeper. The south-facing wall of the cabin had a gap at the lower corner that she'd noticed when they walked past. Not large, but large enough to let cold in, come autumn. Large enough to let small things through. The handle on the pump at the yard had a wobble to it that spoke of a loosened fitting. It was the way she'd always put herself to sleep, making lists, finding the broken things and ordering them. Her mother had called it her gift. Her father had called it her problem. "You cannot fix everything," Maylin he'd told her once years ago when she was 12, and had taken apart the clock on the mantel trying to repair its broken chime. "Some things are meant to stay broken." She had fixed the clock anyway. She fell asleep to the sound of cattle settling in the heat, and something moving through the long grass beyond the window, slow and unhurried, something that belonged to this land in a way she did not. Not yet. She woke before dawn. Old habit. In her father's house, if you were not up before the light, the morning was already gone. She dressed in the dark, tucked her mother's photograph into her boot, where it would not be lost, and came out into the main room to find Caleb Hurst already at the stove, his back to her. He didn't startle. He'd heard her coming. "Coffee," he said without turning. "On the shelf." She found the tin, found the cups, poured for both of them. She set his on the table at the place she'd seen him sit the night before, and took her own to the window. The valley was beginning to pale at the far edge. She could see more of it now than she'd been able to take in the day before, the way it spread out wider than she'd imagined, the dark shapes of cattle dotting the distant grass, the line of trees along what must be a creek bed. The land went further than it should. She'd thought that yesterday, but in the dark and the exhaustion, she'd pushed it aside. Now she turned it over. For a man who appeared to have very little, Caleb Hurst had a great deal of land. "How many head?" she asked. He turned from the stove. "What? Cattle. How many head are you running?" A pause, brief but there. "Enough to keep busy." "That's not an answer." He looked at her over his coffee cup. "No," he agreed. "It ain't." She held his gaze. He held hers. Neither of them looked away. "I fixed things for my father for 10 years, she said finally. I'm good at knowing when something doesn't line up. When a wall looks straight, but the frame underneath has shifted. She looked out the window again at the too wide valley, the too many cattle, the tools on the wall that were too fine for a man who could only afford a cracked wheel wagon. I'm not asking for your secrets, Mr. Hurst. I'm just telling you, I notice things. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Can you ride? Not well. I'll teach you. We head out at first light. He turned back to the stove. She looked at the shelf where the books were. She looked at the rifle on the wall, perfectly maintained. She looked at the saddle hanging near the door, old but clearly expensive, the leather tooled with a pattern that did not belong on a poor man's equipment. She sipped her coffee. She said nothing else. But she filed every detail, the way she always filed things, the way she built her nighttime lists. Neat ordered, waiting for the moment when all the separate pieces would resolve into a picture she could finally read. 3 things happened that first full day that Mei Lin would later understand as the shape of everything to come. The first was this. They were out among the cattle by mid-morning, Hurst on his black horse, and Mei Lin on a gentle bay he'd selected without comment, and a calf had gotten itself tangled in the remains of a broken fence line. Before Hurst could dismount, Mei Lin was already on the ground. She'd pulled her knife, cut the wire free from the calf's foreleg with 3 precise cuts, held the panicking animal still with her weight, and her voice low, steady. The Cantonese her mother had used with frightened things. It worked on animals the same as children, and had it free and on its feet before Hurst had fully gotten out of his saddle. He stood there with his hand on his horse's neck and watched her stand up, brush the dust from her skirt, and fold her knife closed. You've done that before, he said. I've done most things before, she said, one way or another. He nodded once, slowly. The same way he'd nodded the night before when she'd told him about her mother. The second thing was this. In the late afternoon, a man rode onto the property without being invited. He was heavy-set and expensively dressed for a man on horseback, with the kind of fullness in his face that speaks of many meals taken without thinking about who prepared them. He rode to the cabin yard and looked around with the air of a man surveying something he considered already his. His name, she would learn, was Denton Cross. Hurst, he said, not getting down from his horse. I heard you'd gotten yourself some help. His eyes moved to Mei Lin and stayed there in a way that made the back of her neck go tight. Didn't know it'd be well. He smiled. Exotic. Hurst stepped forward. 1 step. That was all. But something changed in the air between them. Something shifted in Hurst's posture that was quiet and absolute, and that made Cross's horse take a sideways step. Anything you need, Cross, Hurst said. His voice had not changed. That was the thing. His voice was exactly the same, flat and unhurried. But the thing behind the voice was different. Cross's smile stayed on his face, but stopped reaching his eyes. Just being neighborly. Thought I'd remind you my offer on this parcel still stands. 60 days left on my patience, I'd say. Your patience, Hurst said, is your own business. Cross looked at Mei Lin again. And hers. Is mine, Hurst said. He said it simply. He said it without heat. But he said it with the same finality with which you close and latch a door, and Denton Cross looked at him for a long moment, and then touched his hat brim, and turned his horse, and rode away without another word. Mei Lin waited until the sound of hoofbeats had faded. He wants your land, she said. He does. And you're not selling. No. Hurst turned back toward the cabin. I am not. She watched Cross's dust trail settle in the heat. He doesn't seem like a man who takes no for an answer. No, Hurst said. He doesn't. He walked back to the cabin. She stood in the yard and watched the empty road for a moment longer, and the back of her neck was still tight, and the folding knife was still in her skirt pocket, and she thought about how her father had said the man who bought her was either desperate or simple. Standing in that yard, watching that road, she was becoming increasingly certain that Caleb Hurst was neither. The third thing was the smallest of the 3 and the one she thought about longest afterward. Late evening. She had found a loose board on the porch and was hammering it back into place using a nail she'd pulled from the old timber and re-straightened because she hadn't wanted to go through his things looking for new ones without permission. He came out and watched her work. She didn't look up. She lined the nail set it with 3 taps, drove it home with 5. "You straightened that nail," he said. "The wood's still good. Didn't need a new one." He was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down on the porch step, not directing her, not overseeing, just sitting, and he picked up a spare piece of timber from the pile at the corner and turned it over in his hands, the way a person handles something they're thinking about, not something they need. "My father built this cabin," he said, 31 years ago. He was 24. She drove in the next nail. "He built it to have a something small to come back to," Hurst said, "so he'd remember what simple felt like." She looked up at that. "And you?" He turned the timber over. "I come back to it for the same reason." She held that for a moment, turned back to the porch board. "I built a chest of drawers once," she said, "out of wood I found in an alley behind a furniture maker's shop, pieces he'd thrown away. My father said I wasted a week, but I built it and it was solid and it held its weight and no one could tell me otherwise." Hurst looked at her. "Where is it now?" "Still in his house," she said. "He uses it for his things." He nodded, set the timber down. "The hammer's good," she said. "Good balance." "My father's," he said. She drove in the last nail and stood up and tested the board with her boot heel. Solid. Done. "Good night, Mr. Hurst," she said. "Good night, Miss Lynn." She went inside. She lay on the cot in the small dark room and listened to the summer night move through the valley, the cattle, the insects, the wind in the dry grass, and she held very still, and thought about a man who built a small cabin to remember what simple felt like, and who had a saddle that cost more than her father's monthly earnings, and who had stepped forward one single step in a dirt yard and made a large man's horse flinch. She thought about what she'd said to him. "I notice things," and she thought about what he had not said and what he had not explained, and the 60 days Cross had put on his patience, and the way the land spread wider than it should from a cabin this small and plain. She pressed her thumb against the edge of her mother's photograph. She was not afraid, but she was paying attention. And in this valley, in this summer, under this particular sky, she already understood that paying attention was going to matter more than anything else she'd brought in that flour sack. The second morning, Mei Lin found the ledger. She hadn't been looking for it. She'd been looking for a spare candle. The one in the storeroom had burned to nothing around midnight, and she'd woken in total dark. And rather than lie there, she'd gotten up and come to the main room to find something useful to do. The ledger was on the shelf behind the row of books, spine out unmarked, wedged between a surveying manual and a Bible with a cracked cover. It fell when she pulled the Bible free. She caught it before it hit the floor. She looked at it for a moment. Just the cover. Brown leather, well worn at the corners. A man's initials stamped in the lower right, CWH. She put it back exactly as it had been and did not open it. But she stood there in the dark for a long moment with her hand still on the shelf, and she thought about those initials, and she thought about the tooled saddle, and she thought about the way Denton Cross had looked at this land, the way a man looks at something he already considers his. She found a candle. She went back to her room. She did not sleep again until nearly dawn. Caleb Hurst was already at the pump when she came out splashing water on his face, and he looked at her and said, "You were up in the night." It wasn't a question. "Light sleeper," she said. He handed her a towel without comment. She dried her hands. He walked to the stove and she followed, and they fell into the rhythm of the morning hymn at the fire, her setting the cups as though they'd been doing it for years rather than 2 days. That ease alarmed her slightly. She didn't let it show. "What do we do today?" she asked. "Check the north fence line. 2 posts were down yesterday. If they're not up by tonight, we'll lose cattle into the ravine." "I can set a fence post." He looked at her over his shoulder. "I know you can." They rode out after first light, and she was better in the saddle than she'd been the day before, because she had paid attention to everything he'd shown her, and she didn't make the same mistake twice. He noticed. She could tell by the way he didn't comment on it, which was she was learning Caleb Hurst's version of a compliment. The north fence line ran along a low ridge that gave out across the whole of the valley, and when they came up over it, Mei Lin pulled her horse to a stop without meaning to. The land went further than she'd imagined, even in daylight. Miles of summer brown grass broken by dark threads of creek and the far-off shapes of cattle moving slow in the heat. And all of it seemed to belong to the same silence, the same unbroken sky. "How much of this," she said very carefully, "is yours?" Hurst had stopped his horse beside her. He was quiet for 3 full seconds. "Enough to work," he said. She turned to look at him. "You said that yesterday." "It was true yesterday, too." "Mr. Hurst," she kept her voice even, "I notice things. I told you that. I'm not asking because I'm being nosy. I'm asking because Cross rides onto your property like a man who thinks he already owns it, and if I'm going to be any use to you, I need to understand what we're dealing with." He looked at her for a long moment. The gray eyes moved across her face the way they moved across the horizon, slow and reading, taking inventory. 6,000 acres, he said. She let that number sit between them for a moment. 6,000, she repeated. Give or take. And the cattle. 460 head last count. She turned back to the valley, looked at it again with new numbers behind her eyes. And you live in a 2-room cabin. I told you my father built it to have something small to come back to. He clicked his horse forward. Come on, those posts won't set themselves. She followed him, and she said nothing more, but her mind was running fast and quiet the way it always ran when she was trying to solve something, sorting, filing, arranging the pieces into a picture that made sense. A man with 6,000 acres and 400 cattle living small. Hiding or close enough to hiding to be the same thing. A buyer from out of town with 60 days of patience, left on an offer that hadn't been accepted. A ledger with a dead man's initials, CWH. Caleb's father almost certainly behind a row of books. And a girl from Sutter Creek with rough hands and a folding knife who he'd paid $40 for. She reset the first fence post beside him in silence and thought about what you hide when you're not hiding from fear. Sometimes she decided you hide things you're protecting. The question was what exactly Caleb Hurst needed to protect hard enough to disappear behind a cracked chimney cabin at the edge of his own land. By the time the third post was set, she thought she might be starting to understand. They were on the way back when she heard the other rider. She heard him before she saw him, which told her he wasn't trying to be quiet. The kind of man who assumes his presence is welcome, because it's never been unwelcome. And when she turned in the saddle, she recognized the build even at distance, Denton Cross, and 2 men behind him this time. Hurst heard it too. He'd already turned his horse. Cross rode up to them on the ridge rather than waiting at the cabin, which struck Mei Lin as deliberate. Meeting them out here away from any structure in open country was a kind of statement. She'd seen her father do the same thing with men he owed money. Move them to open ground where you could see everything coming and there were no walls to hide behind. Hurst Cross said, not tipping his hat. Didn't expect to find you out on the line. My fence, my line, Hurst said. His voice was flat. The flatness she was beginning to recognize. Cross's eyes went to Mei Lin. Stayed there too long. Bringing the hired help along for company. Bringing my worker along to work, Hurst said. Something you want, Cross? Just a conversation. Cross shifted his weight in the saddle, easy and unhurried, the way a large man moves when he wants you to notice how unhurried he is. I've been talking to the county assessor. Interesting conversation. Seems there may be some questions about your father's original land grant. Survey discrepancies. That kind of thing. The air changed. Mei Lin felt it before she understood it, a drop in something. A subtle shift in the quality of the silence between the 2 men that made the hair on her arms stand up. Hurst said nothing for 4 full seconds. 4 was a long time. Survey discrepancies, he said finally. Could be nothing. Cross smiled. It was the kind of smile that told you exactly what kind of man he was. Could be something. Hard to say until the assessor gets out here and takes a proper look. which he's agreed to do. Should be sometime in the next month or so. He looked out at the valley the same way he'd looked at it from the cabin yard, like a man standing in a room he's already rearranged in his head. Be a shame if there were problems with the title. Man in your position alone out here working this hard, you'd want everything in order. Everything is in order, Hearst said. Well? Cross pulled his horse around. Then you've got nothing to worry about. He rode away. His two men followed without speaking. None of them had looked at Mei Lin again. She watched them go. That's not nothing, she said. No, Hearst said. It's not. He's going after the title to your land. He's been trying to for 3 years. She turned in her saddle to face him. And you haven't told anyone? No lawyer? No. I have a lawyer. Something moved through his jaw, brief and controlled. I have documents. My father filed everything correctly, but Cross has money, and Cross has patience, and a corrupt assessor, and a crooked filing, and... He stopped. He looked at his hands on the reins for a moment. It's being handled. Is it? He looked at her. Yes. She held his gaze for a long time. He held hers back. Neither of them moved. The ledger on your shelf, she said. Behind the Bible. His expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. Just slightly. Just enough. I didn't open it, she said. It fell and I caught it and I put it back. But CWH, that's your father. Charles William Hearst, he said. Quiet. It's the original land record, isn't it? Survey notes grant documentation. He said nothing. I know what a land record looks like, she said. My father almost lost his shop to a false filing 3 years ago. I spent 2 weeks at the county office with him going through every document. I know what you keep close when someone's trying to take something from you. She looked toward the valley at Cross's dust trail fading in the heat. Whatever Cross is claiming about survey discrepancies, your father's original notes would contradict it. Hearst was very still. Yes, he said. One word, careful as a step on uncertain ground. Then you need more than a lawyer. She turned her horse back toward the cabin. You need someone who understands what the documents say versus what someone claims they say. Those are two different problems. She started riding. He came up beside her. Miss Lin, he said. I'm not offering to fix it, she said. I'm saying I understand the shape of it now, that's all. He rode beside her and said nothing, and she could feel him thinking, feel the weight of something he was deciding, and she did not push because she had learned early that pushing a man like this only made him close further. He would get there on his own, or he wouldn't. Either way, she needed to understand the land. They were halfway back when he said very quietly, My father came out here in 1847. Nothing out here then. He built the cabin first, then the grazing land, then the cattle operation. Took him 15 years. He died in 1871 and left it to me. He paused. I was in the war when he died. Came back to a land that Cross's family had already started picking at the edges of. They got 300 acres off the southwest corner through a corrupted county filing before I could stop it, Mei Lin said. And you've been fighting it since. I have. But you never moved back into a bigger house, never made it obvious how much was left. A long pause. If Cross knows the full scope of it, Hearst said, he knows what it's worth fighting for. And if you look like a man with almost nothing, then the fight doesn't look worth having. She nodded slowly. The pieces locked together with a clean precision that she recognized the same feeling as a joint-fitted right wood meeting wood without gap or wobble. So the cabin isn't about remembering what simple feels like. He was quiet for a moment. It's both things, he said. It's always both things. She looked straight ahead. That's the most honest thing you've said to me since I got here, she said. He didn't deny it. She gave him credit for that too. They reached the cabin yard as the afternoon heat began to tip toward evening, and Mei Lin climbed down from her horse and walked it to the trough, and she was thinking so hard about land grants and survey fraud and Denton Cross's self-satisfied smile that she almost didn't notice the man sitting on the porch step. He was young, mid-20s at most, with a dark hat pushed back on his head and the look of a man who'd been riding a long way in the heat. When he saw Hurst, he stood up fast. "Mr. Hurst." His voice was tight. "I came as soon as I heard." Hurst dismounted. His face had gone still in a different way now, not the careful stillness of a man controlling what he shows, but the stillness of a man bracing. "What did you hear, Tommy?" "Cross got to Abe Geller," the young man said. "Abe was keeping your south herd. 3 years good man, never a problem. Cross offered him, I don't know what he offered him, but it was enough. Abe left this morning with Cross's men." The silence that followed was complete. Mei Lin stood at the horse trough and did not move. Hurst said, "He took anyone with him?" "No, just himself. But he knew the layout, Mr. Hurst. He knew the south pasture, the creek crossing points, which fence sections were weak. If Cross is planning something, he's planning something," Hurst said, flat, absolute. "What do you want me to do?" Hurst looked at the south horizon. His jaw was set, and his eyes were doing the long-range reading thing again, except this time there was something behind it that Mei Lin hadn't seen before. Something that looked like anger, that had been alive a long time, and knew how to be patient. "Move the south herd to the upper pasture tonight," he said. "Take Crane and Whitfield. Don't wait for morning." "Yes, sir." "And Tommy." Hurst's voice dropped. "You come to me direct from here on. Nobody else." The young man nodded once sharp and left at a trot. Mei Lin waited until he was out of earshot. "He has a man inside your operation," she said. "He did," Hurst said. Past tense. "That's not past tense. That's past exposure. Cross already has everything Abe Geller knew." She walked to the porch and sat down on the step the young man had vacated and put her elbows on her knees and thought. "He knows your weak fences. He knows your water crossing points. He's planning to move on you physically, not just through the assessor." Hurst sat down on the other end of the step. "I know. Do you have other men you trust?" 3, maybe 4. "And Cross. He's got money. He can hire whoever he wants." He took off his hat and held it in both hands and looked at the ground for a moment. "I've been fighting this man for 11 years, Miss Lin. I'm tired of it." She looked at him sideways. The tiredness, he said, was real. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way the anger had a weight behind it that wasn't just this year or this summer. It was the tiredness of a man who'd been holding a thing up alone for too long. "Then stop fighting it alone," she said. He looked at her. "I can read a survey document," she said. "I can read a land grant. You said your father's ledger has the original notes. If Cross is claiming survey discrepancies, the original field notes will either confirm or demolish his claim, and if there's a specific discrepancy he's pointing to, I can find where it comes from and whether it's manufactured." He was looking at her very steadily now, the way he looked at the horizon, reading. "Why would you do that?" he said. She met his gaze. "Because I'm here and I notice things, and I'm not useless." She paused. "And because Cross looked at me like I was furniture, and I have a considerable amount of energy left over from 10 years of being looked at that way." Something happened in Caleb Hurst's face. It was small, and it was fast, and she almost missed it, a softening deep down. Something that had been braced for a long time shifting slightly off its guard. He put his hat back on. "After supper," he said, "we'll look at the ledger." She nodded, stood up, went inside to start cooking. She didn't let herself feel how significant that was until she had her back to him and the door was between them. After supper, Caleb Hurst brought the ledger to the table. He set it down between them and opened it to the first page, and Mei Lin leaned over and looked at the handwriting, small and precise, a man who wrote with care, and began to read. Charles William Hurst had been meticulous. 20 years of survey notes, field measurements, creek bed recordings, seasonal cattle counts, all of it in the same careful hand, all of it dated and signed. The original land grant documentation was folded into the back cover, 2 pages of legal language that she read slowly and fully before she said anything. He filed in 1849, she said. March of 49. And the grant boundaries run from the Creek Fork to the North Ridge and east to... She stopped. Read it again. What, Hearst said, the east boundary. She pointed to the text. The grant says to the old Paiute trading post marker. Is that still standing? No, it burned in. He stopped. Something shifted in his expression. It burned in 1865, during the war. She looked at him. Cross's claim of survey discrepancy. Is it the east boundary? The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Yes, Hearst said. His voice was very quiet now. He burned the marker, she said. I could never prove it. You don't have to prove it burned. You have to prove where it stood. She turned back to the ledger. Your father recorded the field measurements. Distance and bearing from 3 reference points, that's standard survey practice. If those reference points still exist, you can locate the original marker position to within a few feet regardless of whether the marker itself is standing. She found the page she was looking for. Here. He measured from the split boulder near the upper creek crossing the lone juniper on the south slope and the... She looked up. The old stone foundation of the Morrison homestead. Hearst was very still. The Morrison foundation is still standing, he said. Then you have 3 points. Cross's manufactured discrepancy collapses the moment someone does the math. She looked at him across the table. Mr. Hearst, your father saved you. He just didn't know he was doing it. Caleb Hearst looked down at the ledger. At his father's handwriting. At 20 years of careful, patient documentation that a man had kept because he was thorough, not because he imagined his son would be fighting for the land 11 years after his death. He put one hand flat on the open page. He did not speak. She gave him the silence. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at the far wall and let him have it, because some moments needed to be moved through without comment. After a while, he said, How do you know so much about survey law? I told you. My father almost lost his shop. A Chinese merchant's shop dispute taught you enough to read a land grant. It taught me enough to be angry about injustice, she said. The reading I did on my own. She looked at him. I read everything I could get my hands on, Mr. Hearst. My father thought it was a waste of a girl's time. I thought it was the only thing I had that no one could take away. He looked at her for a long time. What else can't be taken away? The chest of drawers I built from thrown-away wood, she said. My mother's voice when I remember it, and the fact that I can fix almost anything that's broken. She held his gaze. Everything else is negotiable. He closed the ledger. I'll send this to my lawyer tomorrow, he said, with the measurements marked. I'll mark them tonight, she said. Clearer than they are now. Your father's notation system is creative. A lawyer needs it plain. He almost smiled. She saw it. It was more than the corner of the mouth thing. It actually made it to his eyes for a half second before he pulled it back. All right, he said. She pulled the ledger toward her and reached for the pen on the shelf and began to work, and he sat across from her in the lamplight, and she was aware of him watching. Not uncomfortably, not the way Cross watched, but the way a man watches something he doesn't fully understand yet, and is genuinely trying to. She marked 3 measurements and wrote the notation in plain language, and was starting on the 4th when the sound came from outside. It wasn't a loud sound. It was actually a very quiet sound. That was what made it wrong. A horse moving slow. Deliberate. The kind of slow that isn't tired. The kind of slow that doesn't want to be heard. Hearst was on his feet before she'd fully processed it. He had the rifle off the wall in one motion, checked the chamber from habit, and moved to the side of the window, not in front of it, to the side, which told her this was not the first time he'd done this. She picked up the pen and held it and sat absolutely still. How many? She said quietly. Can't tell yet. His voice was barely a thread. Stay back from the window. She was already moving, not back sideways to the shelf where the tools hung, where she'd noticed 2 days ago that there was a long-handled hatchet on the lowest hook. She took it down. He glanced at her, and she saw something flash across his face, surprise, and then something faster and quieter than surprise. He looked back at the window. "There's two of them," he said, moving around the south side. "The cattle," she said. "Yeah. Cross moved tonight. Or tested whether I'd moved the south herd." He was quiet for a second. "If Tommy got there in time." "What do you need me to do?" she said. He looked at her fully directly, and this time she saw him making a real decision, not a cautious one, not a managed one. A real one. "Stay inside," he said. "If they come to the door, they won't be expecting both of us. And if there's more than two." He held her gaze for one hard second. "There won't be," he said. "Not tonight. Tonight's just the test." He went out the back, quiet as smoke, and she stood in the main room with the hatchet in her hand, and the lamplight making shadows on the wall, and the ledger open on the table to her father's careful handwriting, and she breathed slow and steady and counted to 4 the way her mother had taught her, and she waited. The sound of one set of hoofbeats picking up speed, moving away fast. Then silence. Then Hurst's voice from outside calling her name. She went to the door. He was standing in the yard, rifle in hand, looking south. His shoulders were set in a way she recognized now. The controlled anger, old and patient, and very tired. "They ran," he said. "They got what they came for." "What did they come for?" She looked at him. "To see how fast you'd move. Whether you'd expect it. Whether you're alone." She paused. "You are alone, Mr. Hurst. That's the real problem." He turned to look at her. The night was very quiet around them, the summer dark full of insect sound and the low movement of the wind, and he was looking at her the way he looked at the valley, reading, measuring, taking something in that he meant to keep. "I was," he said, very quietly, "until 4 days ago." She looked at him for a long moment. She did not say anything to that. There was nothing she could say to it that wouldn't be more than she meant yet, and she had learned long ago not to speak more than she meant. She went back inside. She picked up the pen and finished marking the ledger. She worked for 2 more hours, while Hurst sat across from her and watched the window, and neither of them spoke except once when she asked him to hold a page flat so she could trace a measurement line, and once when he set a cup of coffee at her elbow without being asked, and she said thank you without looking up. At some point, she became aware that the way the lamplight fell across the table between them was almost comfortable. That was the word that came to her, and it startled her, because it was the last word she'd expected to use for any part of this situation. Comfortable. Like the two of them had been sitting across this table for a long time. Like the weight of the night and the cattle and Denton Cross's slow, patient greed was something that could be divided between two people and be lighter for the dividing. She closed the ledger when she was finished, pushed it across the table to him. "Everything's marked," she said. "The notation on the east boundary section is underlined twice. That's the one your lawyer needs to start with." He put his hand on the ledger, didn't open it, just held it for a second the way he'd held the timber on the porch. "Miss Lynn," he said. Why did you take the hatchet off the wall?" She looked up. His eyes were steady and direct, and there was something in them she hadn't seen before. Not the watching long-distance thing, something closer and more present than that. "Because I wasn't going to stand in a room and do nothing," she said. "That's not how I'm built." He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "It's not." She pushed back from the table and stood. "Good night, Mr. Hurst." "Good night, Miss Lynn." She went to the storeroom, closed the door, put her mother's photograph on the floor where she could see it, and lay down on her back and stared at the ceiling. Outside, she could still hear him moving, the quiet sound of a man making rounds, checking the yard, checking the fence line closest to the cabin. The sound of a man who wouldn't sleep yet, who would stay up a little longer, being careful, so that everyone else inside could stop being careful for a while. She thought about Cross's men in the dark. She thought about Abe Geller taking Cross's money. She thought about 11 years of one man holding 6,000 acres together by sheer stubbornness and careful hiding. She thought about what he'd said. "I was, until 4 days ago." She pressed her thumb against the edge of the photograph. She was not afraid, and she was not comfortable, and she was not. She told herself firmly attached to anything in this place yet, because attachment was a thing that happened slowly, and she had been here 4 days, and that was not enough time. But she was paying attention. She was paying very close attention. And the thing she kept coming back to, turning over and over in the dark, like a stone with an unexpected weight to it, was this: a man with 6,000 acres and 40 years of stubbornness had looked at a girl who'd been sold by her own father and said, "You'll do," and then had not in any moment since treated her like someone who merely would do. She didn't know what to make of that yet. She was pretty sure she needed to figure it out soon, because the feeling of it was getting harder to file away at night, and she was running out of lists to distract herself with. She fell asleep to the sound of his boots on the porch, slow and steady, walking the perimeter of something he'd spent his whole life refusing to give up. The next morning, before Hearst was awake, Mei Lin went out to the south fence line alone. Not because she was supposed to, because she was who she was. She had her mother's knife in her pocket and the memory of everything Hearst had told her and everything she'd noticed in 4 days of paying close attention, and she walked the fence line in the early light before the heat came up, and she found what she'd expected to find: 3 cut posts. Clean cuts, not animal damage, not weather. Someone had been here with a wire cutter sometime in the night, while 2 men on horseback drew Hearst's attention to the other side of the cabin. Not a test run, a distraction. She stood very still in the dry grass and looked at the cut wire and felt something cold move through her, despite the summer heat, because she understood now what last night had actually been, and it was not what either she or Hearst had named it. It was a door being opened, and it had been opened very quietly while they were sitting at a table solving the wrong problem. She turned and ran back toward the cabin. She was running before she'd fully formed the thought. The cut fence posts. 3 of them. Clean cuts, not weather, not animal. Wire cutters, and a man who knew exactly where to put his hands. And last night's 2 riders, not a test run, not a probe, not what either of them had named it at all. A door. She'd thought it at the time, and then let Hearst talk her out of the word. She hadn't been wrong. She came through the cabin door breathing hard, and Hearst was at the stove with his back to her, and he turned before she'd said a word, reading her face before she opened her mouth. "South fence," she said. 3 posts cut clean. Last night's riders weren't watching to see how you'd react. They were making sure you were looking that direction while someone else worked the fence. He set down what he was holding, very carefully. "How far down the line?" he said. "The section nearest the creek crossing, the one you said was weak." He was already moving to the wall for the rifle. "The cattle," she said. "Tommy didn't get there in time, did he?" "I don't know." Caleb. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and neither of them acknowledged it, but it was there between them, like a stone dropped in still water. "The south herd is gone, or it's going. The fence is down, and that creek crossing leads to Cross's land. We need to move right now." He was already out the door. She followed him. They rode to the south pasture at a pace she hadn't managed yet on horseback, the bay gelding working hard under her, and her hands tight on the reins, and the summer air pressing around them thick with heat. Hearst rode in front flat and fast, not looking back to check on her because he'd already decided she could keep up. She appreciated that about him, even now, even in the middle of this. Tommy was already at the south fence when they got there. He was standing next to his horse with his hat in his hands, and his face doing the thing a young man's face does when it's carrying news. It doesn't want to deliver, going very still, going very careful. Like if he holds completely still, the news might rearrange itself into something smaller. "How many?" Hearst said. 60, maybe 70. Tommy's voice was tight. "They drove them through the creek crossing before I got down here. Whitfield and Crane are tracking, but the grounds—" He stopped. Started again. "The ground's been worked, Mr. Hearst. They dragged something behind the herd to break up the tracks." Hurst stood at the cut fence and looked at the broken posts and said nothing for a long time. Mei Lin watched the set of his shoulders. She'd seen controlled anger from him before, the flat voice, the careful stillness. This was different. This was a man who had been holding a very long rope for a very long time and just felt it pulled from another direction he hadn't fully covered. "This was planned well before last week," she said. He turned to look at her. "The fence cutting the distraction riders driving cattle in a way that destroys the tracks. You don't improvise that overnight." She held his gaze. Abe Geller didn't just tell them where the weak sections were. He told them the timing. When you'd have the fewest men out. When the gaps would be widest. "I know," Hurst said. "Then you know this isn't over. This is the first push. Cross is seeing how much you'll absorb before you break position." "I know that too. Then what are you going to do about it?" She said it plainly, not hard, but plain. "Because tracking 60 cattle across broken ground takes men you don't have. And while you're doing that, Cross is filing his assessor report and his forged survey claim, and—" "I said I know." His voice came out sharper than he'd intended. She could tell because something moved through his jaw immediately after a brief tightening, the recognition that he'd let something out he'd been keeping. She didn't back up. "Don't take it out on me," she said quietly. "I didn't cut your fence." The silence that followed lasted 5 full seconds. Tommy was looking at the horizon with great concentration, pretending very hard to be somewhere else. Hurst took off his hat, ran one hand through his hair, put the hat back. "No," he said. "You didn't." He looked at her properly, not the horizon reading thing, just straight at her face. "I'm sorry." She gave him a short nod, accepted it and moved on, because there was no time for anything else, and she could tell he knew that too. "Tommy," she said, turning to the young man. "Whitfield and Crane, are they good trackers?" "Whitfield is. Crane's better with cattle than tracking. Then pull Crane back and send him to the upper pasture to check the north herd. 2 attacks at once is a cross move from what I've seen of him. Make sure he hasn't sent someone for the others while you're all down here." She looked at Hurst. "Is that right?" He was looking at her with the reading expression. "Yes," he said. "That's right." Tommy looked at Hurst for confirmation. Hurst gave him a single nod. Tommy was on his horse and gone in 30 seconds. Mei Lin turned back to the cut fence. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to answer me straight." "All right." "Cross's men were here last night. They saw the inside of your yard. They would have seen the cabin light." She turned to face him. "Abe Geller knew your operation, but did he know about the ledger?" Hurst went very still. "He knew I kept records," Hurst said carefully. "He knew I kept them in the cabin. Did he know they were the original survey documentation?" A pause that told her the answer before he gave it. "He helped me move them once," Hurst said, "when I had the roof repaired 2 summers ago. He knew what they were." She felt the cold thing move through her again, the same thing she'd felt standing at the cut fence posts in the early light. "Then Cross knows exactly what's in that cabin. And Cross knows that if those field notes and the original grant documentation disappear, his manufactured survey discrepancy has nothing real to contradict it." Hurst looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he started walking back toward the horses, fast. She was right behind him. "You understand what I'm saying. The ledger," he said. "He doesn't just want your cattle, he wants the proof gone. The cattle drive was the distraction this time." She grabbed her horse's reins and was in the saddle before he was. "We left the cabin empty." They rode back hard. The cabin was untouched when they got there. That was the first thing she saw, and she felt the tension in her chest release 1 notch, just 1, because untouched now didn't mean safe going forward, and she knew that, and so did he. Hurst went directly to the shelf, pulled the Bible. The ledger was there. He held it for a moment, both hands, the way he'd held it the first night. "We can't leave it here," Mei Lin said. "I know." "Does your lawyer have a copy of any of this?" "The grant document, yes. The field notes, no." We need to get the field notes to him before Cross files with the assessor. If the forged document goes in first and the original notes aren't on record to contradict it, I know. He set the ledger on the table, looked at her. I'll ride to Stockton tomorrow. Day's ride there, day back. The lawyer's office has a fireproof safe. Tomorrow might be. I can't leave tonight, not with the south herd missing and the fence down and one man tracking. He said it without heat, just laying the facts out. This is the reality, Mei Lin. I can hold one thing or the other tonight, not both. She looked at the ledger. She looked at him. Then I'll copy the field notes tonight, she said. The measurement sections, everything relevant to the east boundary. If the original is lost, I'm not going to let the original be lost. People don't let things be lost, she said. Things get lost anyway. I'm making a copy tonight, and you're riding to Stockton at first light with both, and that's not negotiable. He looked at her for a long beat. You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met, he said. I've been called worse, she said. By my own father. Give me the pen. He gave her the pen. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening while he rode the perimeter with his rifle and checked on Tommy's progress and sent word to Whitfield to circle wide on the tracking. She could hear him coming and going, the rhythm of his horse in the yard. His voice low and businesslike with Tommy. When the young man came back with news, Crane had gotten to the north herd. It was intact. Cross had kept that attack concentrated in the south. Small mercy. She wrote the field measurements in a clear hand, cleaner than her own regular writing. The kind of precision she used when the accuracy of something mattered. Hurst came in around sunset and looked over her shoulder at what she'd done without touching anything. That's good, he said. I know it is, she said. Go eat something. He almost laughed. She heard the beginning of it, quickly swallowed, and felt unreasonably pleased with herself for producing even the shadow of it on a day like this one. He made food. She kept writing. He brought a plate to her elbow, and she ate one-handed without stopping. It was later, well into the dark, the lamp between them burning low, when he sat down across from her and put his hands flat on the table and said, I owe you an explanation. She looked up. The cabin, he said. The pretending. You deserve to know why. She set the pen down. My father left me the land, he said, but he also left me his name. Out here, the Hearst name means the valley. It means 6,000 acres and control of the water rights and the main cattle corridor to Stockton. The name is worth more than the land in some ways because the name tells people what they're getting. He looked at his hands. When Cross started coming after the title, the first thing he went after wasn't the survey. He went after me. 3 of my men quit in 1 month. A water agreement with the Harmon family upstream got canceled without explanation. The bank in Stockton suddenly found reasons to slow my credit line. He paused. When you're a target, everything with your name on it becomes a target. So you took your name off things, she said. As much as I could. I put the cattle operation under a holding company my lawyer set up. I moved what records I could off-site. I stopped staying at the main house. He looked up. The main house is 2 miles east, bigger than this cabin. My father built it after the operation grew. I haven't slept there in 2 years. She absorbed that. How many people know about the main house? Cross knows. He's never been able to get to it because it's surrounded by open ground, and I have 3 men stationed there, but he knows it exists. And the 6,000 acres, the 400 cattle. Anyone who's been in this county long enough knows the rough shape of it. But the details. He shook his head. I stopped talking about specifics the day I understood Cross wasn't going to stop. If he didn't know the exact scope, he couldn't be sure it was worth what it would cost him to fight. But now he knows, she said, because Abe Geller told him. Now he knows. She looked at him for a long time. Why did you tell me when I asked about the acreage and the cattle you didn't have to answer? He met her eyes. No, I didn't. So why? He was quiet. Choosing. She could see the choosing happening. Because you'd already figured out half of it, he said finally. And the half you'd figured out on your own was more accurate than what most people would get if I told them directly. He looked at his hands again. And because... He stopped. Because, she prompted. Because you sat on the step that first morning and told me you noticed things, and that you weren't asking for my secrets. And then you didn't ask for them. He looked up. Do you know how rare that is? She held his gaze. What did you think I'd do? Run to cross with what I'd noticed. I didn't know what you'd do. He said it plainly. I'd known you 4 days. You'd known Abe Geller 3 years. Yes. A pause with a great deal of weight in it. I had. She picked up the pen. I'm almost finished with the measurement section. The boundary calculations are. Next, those are the ones your lawyer needs to run against whatever crosses assessor claims. When I'm done, everything'll be in order. He nodded, didn't move to go. Can I ask you something now? He said. She kept writing. You can ask. Your father, did he tell you anything about me before he sent you here? Anything at all? She considered that. He said you'd paid in advance. He said you were desperate or simple. She glanced up. I've revised both of those assessments significantly. He didn't tell you. He stopped, started again. He didn't say anything about why I reached out to him specifically. She set the pen down. He contacted you, she said. It wasn't a question. Something had rearranged fast and quiet somewhere behind her ribs. I put out a notice, Hearst said. Through the Stockton paper. I needed reliable help for the summer, someone without ties to Cross, without ties to anyone in this county who might be in his pocket, someone from outside the situation. And my father answered the notice. He wrote a letter. He reached into his shirt pocket and set a folded piece of paper on the table between them. 3 weeks ago. She looked at the letter. She did not pick it up. He offered you, she said. Her voice had gone very level. He saw your notice, and he wrote you a letter offering me. He described someone capable, hard-working, someone who... He sold me, she said. And he did it through a newspaper notice like selling a good saddle horse. She looked at the letter. May I? It's addressed to me, he said. But yes. She picked it up and read it. It was short. Her father's handwriting, precise and small. His English formal in the way of a man who'd learned the language from books rather than conversation. He described her in 3 sentences. Capable of hard work. Good with tools and repair. Reliable. No mention of her name until the 4th sentence, and even there it was abbreviated, my eldest May, as though her full name was a detail he couldn't quite be bothered with. The price was in the last line. $40 would be fair and covers the cost of transport. She folded the letter, set it back on the table, pressed her fingers flat on the fold for a moment. He didn't tell you he was going to do this, Hearst said. No. She kept her voice even. She was very good at keeping her voice even. He told me the night before. He said he'd made an arrangement. She looked up. $40. Do you know that he spent $60 on a card game in March? I know, because I found the receipt in his coat when I was mending it. Hearst said nothing. She gave him credit for that. He didn't reach for the easy comfort of words. I'm not angry at you, she said. I want to be clear about that. You posted a notice. He answered it. That's... She took a breath. That's just what it is. You have every right to be angry at the situation. I am angry at the situation, she said. I've been angry at the situation since before the wagon wheel broke. She looked at him steadily. I'm also aware that I am sitting at your table helping you protect something real and important, which is more than I was doing in Sutter Creek. So, she picked up the pen. I'm going to finish this copy, and tomorrow you're going to Stockton, and we are going to handle one problem at a time. He looked at her for a long moment. The reading expression, but deeper than usual, like he was looking at something further away and trying to bring it into focus. All right, he said quietly. She wrote. He stayed at the table. Neither of them spoke again for a long time, but the silence between them was different now. not the careful silence of two people managing their distance, but something else. Something that had more weight to it, and more ease, and that she didn't have an exact name for, but recognized the texture of. Trust. Or the beginning of it. The place where trust starts before either person has decided to call it that. She was on the last page of the measurement copy when Tommy knocked. The knock was fast, too fast. The knock of someone who'd been running. Hurst was up before she'd fully lifted her head. He opened the door, and Tommy was there breathing hard. And behind him, the night had a color it hadn't had before, orange at the edge. Wrong orange. Too bright moving. South pasture's burning, Tommy said. Grass fire. It's moving toward the feed barn. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then Mei Lin looked at the ledger and the copy on the table and made a decision so fast she didn't fully experience making it. She grabbed both, wrapped them in the oilcloth from the shelf, tucked the bundle under her arm, and was past Hurst and Tommy and through the door before either of them had gotten their boots back on. She heard Hurst call her name behind her. She didn't stop. The feed barn was 200 yards south of the cabin, and the fire was moving toward it from the pasture beyond grass fire in a dry summer, the kind that moves faster than it looks like it should, because you're measuring it against the horizon and not against the ground at your feet. She could feel the heat before she could see the flames clearly, and she could hear the cattle somewhere beyond the fire line, the sound of panicked animals that didn't know which direction to run. The barn doors were closed. Inside was winter feed tools, and in the back corner under a tarp, she'd noticed it her second day, filed it away a wooden crate of papers that Hurst had moved from the main house. She'd never asked what was in it. She knew now. She got the barn doors open and went in. The smoke was coming through the south wall in thin threads, not thick yet, but the heat on that wall was already wrong. She crossed to the back corner, pulled the tarp, found the crate. She tucked the oilcloth bundle on top of the papers and lifted the whole thing and started back. The south wall cracked. Not the fire, the wood of the wall expanding from the heat, a sound like a rifle shot, and she stumbled from the shock of it and caught herself and kept moving the crate heavy in her arms, and she was 3 steps from the door when a burning piece of grass came through the gap under the south wall and caught the hay on the floor, and the floor to her left went orange in 3 seconds flat. She went right, kept moving, made the door. She was in the yard 10 steps clear of the barn when Hurst's hands grabbed her by the shoulders from behind so hard it nearly took her off her feet. What in the... He pulled her further from the barn, and she let him, and when he turned her to face him, his expression was doing something she hadn't seen before, not the flat, controlled anger, not the careful reading. Something raw. Something that didn't have the management on it that all his other expressions did. I told you to... He stopped, looked at the crate in her arms, looked at the oilcloth bundle on top of it. His hands were still on her shoulders. The papers from the main house, she said. She was slightly out of breath. They were under a tarp in the back corner. I didn't know what was in them until just now, but I could guess. He looked at the crate. The deed to the main house, he said. The cattle ledgers from the last 6 years. The Harmon Water Agreement. He looked at her face. You could have, but I didn't. She held the crate out to him. Take this. He took it. Both arms. He held it against his chest, the way a man holds something he'd thought he was about to lose, and for a moment he didn't say anything, and neither did she. And the fire was loud behind them, and Tommy was shouting something to the men working the water pump, and none of that was the loudest thing in the space between them. Mei Lin? His voice was different. She'd heard flat, she'd heard careful. She'd heard tired and angry, and something almost warm. This was none of those things. The fire's deliberate, she said. This isn't grass fire from carelessness. Someone set this. He looked at the burning barn. I know, he said, while we were inside working on the ledger. While Tommy was watching the south pasture. Someone walked up to the grass line in the dark and lit it. She met his eyes. Cross is done testing. He looked at her for 5 full seconds. Then something happened that she hadn't expected. He set the crate down on the ground between them, straightened up, and looked at her with an expression that was completely unguarded for the first time since she'd met him. No management, no reading, no careful distance. Just the thing itself, whatever it was, sitting right there on the surface of his face. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." "Your hands." She looked down. The palms were red from the heat of the crate's wood. Not burned. Close. "I'm fine," she said. "You went into a burning barn alone," he said. Still that voice, still that face. "You went into a dark yard alone last night with a rifle," she said. "I didn't ask you if you were hurt." "That's different." "How?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "Exactly," she said. She picked up the oilcloth bundle from the top of the crate and held it out to him. "The ledger and my copy. They're dry. Keep them on your person tonight. Sleep with them if you have to." He took the bundle, didn't look away from her face. "Why did you run in there?" he said, very quiet. "Because it needed to be done, and I was closest." "Mei Lin." "Because someone has been trying to destroy everything your father built, and everything you've spent 11 years protecting, and I was not going to stand in a yard and watch them win while I did nothing." She said it evenly. "That's not how you're built," he said. He said it with the same words she'd used, and it was exactly right, and they both knew it. She looked at him. He looked at her. Behind them, the barn made another cracking sound, and Tommy shouted something, and Hurst finally looked away. "Get back from the barn," he said. Not the command voice, the other one. "Please." She stepped back. He picked up the crate and handed it to Tommy. When the young man ran past, gave him instructions in a fast, low voice, and then turned back to the fire, and Mei Lin watched him work, giving orders, pulling men into position, organizing the water line, with the quiet authority of a man who'd done this kind of thing under worse circumstances than a pasture fire. Soldier, she thought. He'd been a soldier. She kept forgetting that, and then remembering it at moments like this when the calmness under pressure had a different quality than ordinary calmness. Military calmness. The kind you learn when the alternative is catastrophic. The barn was a loss. They knew that within an hour. But the fire didn't reach the cabin, and the cattle had moved uphill from the smoke on their own instinct, and the 6 men Hurst had working the water line held the fire to the pasture and the barn, and nothing beyond. By midnight, the fire was out. Mei Lin was sitting on the porch step, with her red palms face up on her knees, when Hurst came and sat beside her. Close. Not the careful 2 feet between them arrangement. Close. He didn't say anything for a while. She looked at her hands. "The feed stored in the barn. We'll manage. Winter is—" "We'll manage," he said again. Not dismissive. Certain. She nodded. "I found something," he said. "On the south edge of the fire line. Where it started." He reached into his shirt pocket and set a small object on the step between them. A spent match, which meant nothing matches, were everywhere. But wrapped around its base was a strip of paper, and on the paper was printed a land company name she didn't recognize. She picked it up, read the name. "Graves Land and Cattle Company," she said. "Cross's Holding Company," Hurst said. "The one he bought the southwest 300 acres through." She looked at the match, looked at him. "He left this on purpose." "Yes." "That's not careless. That's a message." "Yes." "He wants you to know it was him. He wants you to know he's not hiding anymore." She set the match down. "He's escalating because he thinks he's close enough that it doesn't matter if you know." Hurst looked at the dark south pasture where the fire had been. "He might be right." "He's not right." She said it firmly. "You have the ledger. I have the copy. Tomorrow you go to Stockton, and you put both in your lawyer's safe, and you file for an emergency court date to enter the original field notes as evidence before the assessor can submit Cross's fabricated survey." He looked at her. "Your lawyer can do that," she said. "Can't he? If I get there early enough, if the assessor hasn't already, then you leave before sunrise." She held his gaze. "You leave at 4 in the morning if you have to." He was quiet, looking at her. "Why are you doing this?" he said. Not sharp, not suspicious, genuinely asking. She looked at her red palms for a moment, thought about her father's letter, the careful handwriting, the $40 at the end of it. Because someone in my life decided what I was worth, she said. And they were wrong. And I'd like to help make sure the same thing doesn't happen to this land. He was looking at her with the unguarded expression again, the one without management on it. Caleb, she said the first time deliberately this time. Go sleep for 2 hours. I'll wake you at 4. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. He stood. She stood. He looked at her palms one more time, the redness, the heat that still sat in them, and she thought for a moment he was going to take her hands in his, and she held herself very still because she didn't know what she would do if he did. He didn't. He simply looked, and then he looked at her face, and then he turned and went inside. She sat back down on the step. She put her palms together and pressed them and felt the heat of them, the proof of the evening. The physical evidence that she'd made a choice, and the choice had cost her something small, and she didn't regret it. She looked at the dark valley, at the shapes of the cattle high on the hillside, at the far-off star-interrupted line of the ridge where Cross's land started. She thought about a man who'd left a match as a message, a man who was done hiding his intentions, and she thought about what that meant, that Cross was done hiding, and what it meant for tomorrow and for the days after, and for the long summer that still had weeks left in it. She was not afraid, but she was done pretending to herself that this was just a summer job in someone else's war. Somewhere between the wagon wheel and the fence posts and the barn fire, it had become hers too. She went inside, set herself at the table, and did not sleep. She made a second copy of the field notes instead, because 1 was good, 2 was better. And the third time something happened to this family's documents, she intended to be 1 step ahead of it. The lamp burned all night. At 4 in the morning, she went to Hurst's door and knocked twice. He answered immediately. He hadn't slept either. She could tell by his eyes. She handed him the second copy. He looked at it, then at her. She said, "Different hiding place from the first one, just in case." He took it without a word. He took his horse from the post, and Mei Lin stood in the yard and watched him ride out in the dark towards Stockton and the lawyer's office, and the thing that might, if it arrived in time, if the court agreed, if the original field notes were enough, finally put a legal wall between Caleb Hurst and 11 years of Denton Cross. She watched him until the dark swallowed him completely. Then she turned and looked south toward the burned barn, toward the pasture, where 60 cattle were gone and the grass was still charred. Denton Cross had sent a message. She thought it was time to send one back. Mei Lin spent the day Hurst was gone the same way she spent every problem that didn't have an immediate solution. She worked. She got the south fence line repaired before noon, just herself and Tommy, and a borrowed post digger, because the cattle that remained needed a boundary, and a boundary needed posts, and posts needed to go in the ground, whether or not the man who owned the land was present to oversee it. Tommy worked without complaint and watched her handle a post driver with the quiet attention of someone revising a prior assumption. "You done this before, ma'am," he said around the third post. "I've done most things before," she said, "one way or another." He nodded and didn't ask again. By mid-afternoon, the south line was as solid as she could make it with the materials available. She walked the east boundary next the one nearest the territory. Cross's forged survey was trying to claim, and she found what she'd half expected to find, 2 survey stakes that didn't belong to Hurst. New wood recently driven, placed about 40 feet inside the boundary line that Charles William Hurst's field notes described. She pulled both of them out of the ground. She brought them back to the cabin and set them on the porch step and looked at them for a moment, and then she found a piece of paper and wrote down the exact location where she'd found each one, the compass bearing from the split boulder reference point, the distance in paces, everything precise, and documented the way she'd learned to document things in her father's shop dispute 3 years ago. Cross had been here on the land itself, planting his lie in the ground. She added the paper to the bundle she was keeping. The measurements, the references, the documentation that was growing by the day, like a case being built in a courtroom she hadn't gotten to yet. Hurst came back in the late afternoon. She heard his horse before she saw him, and the pace of it told her something immediately, not the unhurried working rhythm of a man returning from an errand, but something faster, more deliberate. She was off the porch and in the yard before he'd fully stopped. He got down from the horse, and his face was doing the controlled thing, but underneath the control, something was wound tight. "Tell me," she said. "The lawyer filed the emergency motion this morning. The original field notes are in the court record." He took off his hat. Cross filed an injunction 2 hours later. She felt the word land like something dropped from a height. What kind of injunction? Freezing all property actions and claims on disputed land pending the survey assessment. He looked at her steadily. His lawyer was already at the courthouse when mine arrived. They were waiting for us. She stood very still. "He knew you were going." "He had someone watching the road, or watching me." His jaw tightened. "Or watching this property." She thought of Abe Geller. She thought of how much one man could tell you about another man's habits if he'd spent 3 years observing them. When does the injunction take effect? 72 hours. If the county assessor files his report within that window and the court accepts it as primary evidence, Cross's forged survey becomes the legal baseline before our motion can be heard. He put his hat back on. "His man is at the assessor's office right now. I saw him as I was leaving town." "Then the assessor files tomorrow," she said. "Not in 72 hours. Tomorrow." "That's my read." She turned and went inside. He followed. She had the survey stakes on the table before he'd closed the door, the two she'd pulled from the east boundary and her documentation of where they'd been placed. He picked up the first stake, turned it in his hands. "Where?" "East boundary. 40 feet inside your line. 2 of them bearing 63 degrees from the split boulder reference point." She set the paper beside the stake. "I documented both locations precisely. If your lawyer can get this to the judge before the assessor's report goes in physical evidence of boundary tampering placed on your land after the original survey was filed, it corroborates your father's notes and demonstrates active fraud." He looked at the stakes, then at her documentation, then at her. "I need to go back to Stockton tonight," he said. "I know. That's 2 round trips in one day." "I know." She met his eyes. "Cross is counting on you being tired, on you being stretched too thin. He's been watching you long enough to know your limits." "My limits are fine." "I didn't say they weren't. I said he's counting on them." She held out the documentation paper. "Ride tonight. Get this to your lawyer before the assessor's office opens tomorrow morning. The physical stakes plus the precise location record plus the field notes, that's not a discrepancy case anymore. That's criminal land fraud." He took the paper, looked at it, looked at her. "Tommy can stay with you," he said. "And Crane." "I know how to be alone," she said. "I've been doing it longer than I've been here." "Maylin." His voice was different. The other voice, the one without management. "Cross set a fire last night. He planted evidence on my land today. A man who's that close to moving doesn't stop for sleep." She understood what he was saying. She looked at him straight. "I know." "So you won't be alone," he said. "That's not negotiable." She thought about arguing. She thought about the folding knife in her pocket, and the hatchet on the wall, and the 2 copies of the field notes still tucked in their separate locations, and the 10 days of paying attention that had taught her more about this property and its vulnerabilities than most people learned in a year. "All right," she said. "Tommy and Crane." He was out the door in 5 minutes. She watched him ride out a second time in one day, and this time she felt the watching differently. Not as a woman looking after a man who might not come back, she told herself firmly, but as a person tracking a moving piece of a problem and calculating the odds. She went and found Tommy. "Tonight," she said, "we watch the east fence line and the main road, alternating. You take the first watch, I'll take the second." She paused. "And I need you to show me how to get to the main house." Tommy blinked. "Mr. Hurst didn't say anything about—" "Mr. Hurst doesn't know everything I know yet," she said. "Show me." He showed her. The main house was 2 miles east along a track that wasn't much more than a suggestion in the dry grass. Deliberate, she understood now, kept vague to avoid advertising its existence. The house itself was larger than she'd imagined, built with the same careful construction as the cabin, but on a different scale entirely, the kind of building a man puts up when he intends to stay. She walked at once, fully making her assessment. Solid walls, good sight lines from the front windows. One weak point at the southeast corner, where a storage lean-to attached to the main structure. If someone wanted to force an entry without direct confrontation, that was where they'd go. She found lumber in the storage lean-to. She found nails. She spent 2 hours reinforcing the southeast corner, working fast and quiet in the late afternoon heat. And when she was done, she stood back and looked at what she'd built, and decided it would hold against anything short of a determined assault with significant numbers. She hoped it wouldn't come to that. It was Tommy who came for her at 10:30 that night. She was on the porch of the cabin, second watch, the darkness full of summer insects and the distant low sound of cattle, when she heard him running. Running, not walking, and she was on her feet with the hatchet in her hand before he'd reached the yard. "Riders," he said, breathing hard. "Coming up from the south. 8, maybe 10. Not Cross's road. The back way through the ravine." She felt her whole body go sharp and still. 8 men didn't come at night through a ravine to have a conversation. "Crane," she said, "already up at the north fence. He doesn't know yet. Get him. Both of you to the main house east side now." She was moving as she spoke. "Go around, not down the main track. They'll have someone watching the main track." "What are you going to do?" "Meet them before they get there," she said. Tommy grabbed her arm. "Ma'am, there's 8 of them. I know how many there are." She pulled free. "Go." She didn't go toward the main house. She went toward the storage shed near the burned barn, because she'd been thinking since that morning about what you do when someone is coming for something specific, and Cross's men were coming for a building, which meant what mattered wasn't stopping them at the boundary, it was making sure what they came for wasn't there when they arrived. The crate of documents was already at the main house. She'd moved it that afternoon while she was doing the reinforcement work, tucked it into a floor space under the back bedroom with a board over it, because she'd learned by now that hiding things in obvious places was how you lost them. What she needed from the shed was different. She found the kerosene lanterns, 4 of them full, and the length of rope she'd been using for fence work, and the spare coil of wire she'd noticed 2 days ago on the second shelf. She took all of it. She had a plan. It wasn't a comfortable plan, but it was a plan built from the only material she had, which was everything she knew how to do. She was halfway to the main house's east side when she heard the first rider break from the ravine. Too fast. They were moving faster than she'd calculated. She ran. She made the southeast corner of the main house and pressed against the wall, and heard them coming, hoofbeats, multiple, spreading out to circle the building the way you spread your forces when you're taking a position. Professional. Organized. These weren't opportunists. These were men who'd been told exactly what to do. She had the rope in her hands, and she tied the first lantern to the corner post of the storage lean-to, and the second to the fence post 20 feet out, and she strung the wire between them at shin height for a horse low, near invisible in the dark, and she was working on the third position when the first man rounded the corner on foot. He was big. He saw her immediately. "Hey!" She swung the unlit lantern. It caught him across the side of the face with enough force to stagger him, and she was already moving past him before he'd recovered, and she heard him behind her, but he was down to one operational eye, and she had the advantage of knowing exactly where the fence post was, and he did not. He hit the wire. Hard. She didn't stop to watch him fall. The second man she heard before she saw he was coming from the north side of the house, and he had a torch which told her everything she needed to know about what Cross had sent them to do. She dropped low under his arm as he raised the torch and drove her shoulder into his midsection, and he went back against the house wall, and the torch fell. She stamped it out. She was breathing very hard now. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, she identified it correctly as adrenaline. The physical fact of a body doing something it hadn't trained for, and she breathed through it the way her mother had taught her and kept moving. "Tommy," she called. "East side. Now." Tommy's voice from somewhere north. "We're coming." Then a sound she recognized, a rifle fired once deliberate. Hurst's rifle. Hurst's particular way of firing it, which she'd heard at the fence line 3 days ago when he'd made a shot at distance to move a stray calf. One shot. Warning height, not killing height. From the other direction. He was supposed to be in Stockton. She heard horses scatter, 3 at least, from the sound of it. Men who'd stayed mounted and lost their nerve when they heard the shot from a direction they hadn't covered. She heard shouting, 2 voices, then silence, then the creak and thud of someone jumping a fence. And then from the front of the house, a single voice she recognized. Denton Cross. She came around the front corner, and Cross was there on horseback alone. Now whatever men hadn't run already were moving back toward the ravine, and Hurst was standing 15 feet in front of him with the rifle held low and his face completely, utterly still. Cross looked at Hurst with an expression that had moved past calculation into something raw. Cornered, she thought. A man who'd expected to find an empty house, and found instead the one man he'd spent 11 years trying to outlast. "You should have taken my offer, Hurst," Cross said. His voice was steady, but something underneath it wasn't. 3 years ago, before this got ugly. "Before you made it ugly," Hurst said. "Those aren't the same thing. 6,000 acres is a lot for one man." "It was my father's." "Your father's been dead 6 years. 11, Hurst said. "And counting." Cross's eyes moved. They moved past Hurst, past the rifle, and found Mei Lin standing at the corner of the house. He looked at her for a moment. Then the familiar expression came back. The furniture expression, the dismissive, flat look that she had been looked at with her entire life, first by her father, and then by every man who'd met her after, the look that said, "You don't count in this equation." "I heard you sent a woman into a burning barn," Cross said to Hurst. "Pathetic. I didn't send her anywhere," Hurst said. "She went on her own." Cross looked at Mei Lin with something like contempt. "Women don't build things that last," he said. "They hold on to what men build. That's the whole of it." She looked at him. She was tired. Her hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, and her shoulder ached from the collision with the second man, and she had been awake for nearly 20 hours, and she was tired in a way that went all the way down. But she was clear. "No," she said. "We decide whether what men build survives." She held his gaze. "And tonight, Mr. Cross, I decided yours doesn't." Cross stared at her. "Your survey stakes are in my hands," she said. "Your location, your bearing, documented, dated, witnessed, criminal land fraud. That goes to the judge tomorrow morning, along with your match from the grass fire and the testimony of 2 men who watched your riders cut the south fence line." She paused. "You spent 11 years trying to take this land through lawyers and assessors and paid witnesses. One night, and I handed your whole case back to us." The silence was enormous. Cross looked at Hurst. "You let a $40 girl run your defense." Hurst looked at him for one long, flat second. "I'd be careful," Hurst said quietly, "about what you say about her price." Something in Cross's face shifted. The cornered quality deepened, not just a man who'd lost a battle, but a man who was looking at a situation that was significantly different from the one he'd ridden into and processing the gap between what he'd expected and what was actually here. He pulled his horse back 1 step. "This isn't finished," he said. "No," Hurst said. "It's not. It finishes in court, day after tomorrow from what my lawyer tells me. You might want to be there." Cross said nothing more. He turned his horse and rode. Mei Lin watched him go. She was aware sharply, suddenly, that her legs were not entirely reliable. She put her hand against the corner of the house to stabilize herself. Pressing her palm against the wood, she'd reinforced herself that afternoon, the wood that had held. Hurst was beside her in 4 steps. "You're all right," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'm fine." She was. Mostly. "You were supposed to be in Stockton. I turned back halfway." His voice was very quiet. "Something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. I just..." He stopped. "I turned back." She looked at him. In the dark, his face was that unguarded thing again, the expression without management, and this time it had a quality to it she hadn't seen yet. Something urgent underneath something that had been running a long way. "Your lawyer," she said. "I sent the stakes documentation with a rider. He'll have it before the assessor's office opens." He looked at her hand against the house wall. "You did the reinforcement work this afternoon, on the southeast corner." There was a weak point. "I know. I've been meaning to address it for 2 years." "You're busy," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Something was happening in his face, something working its way up from underneath. "Mei Lin." He said her name the way he'd said it outside the burning barn, like it mattered that he was saying it correctly. "I know," she said, before he could get there, before either of them had to navigate what came after. His eyes searched her face. She looked back at him straight. "One thing at a time," she said. "The court, the land." Then she stopped. "Then," he said. The word hung there between them, simple and enormous, the whole future compressed into a single syllable. Tommy came around the corner at a run and stopped dead when he found them standing close in the dark. He looked between them, made a rapid and correct assessment of the situation. He said, "go check on Crane." He disappeared immediately. Mei Lin almost smiled. She felt it pull at the corner of her mouth, unstoppable, and she pressed her lips together to hold it back. She didn't quite manage it. And Hurst? Hurst looked at the beginning of that smile on her face, the involuntary, tired human thing that she couldn't keep back. And something happened to his entire expression that she had no adequate category for. Something that had been held at a long, careful distance for a long, careful time. He took one step back. Not away, just back enough to breathe. "Come on," he said. His voice was steady, but only just. "You've been up since 4 this morning." She pushed herself off the wall, stood straight. "So have you," she said. "I know." He didn't move toward the house. He was looking at her like a man who has understood something and is still catching up to the understanding. "Caleb." She held his gaze. "The land will hold. The documents are safe. Cross has nothing left that he hasn't already played." She paused. "It's going to be all right." He looked at her for 3 full seconds. "When you say things," he said slowly, "I believe them. I don't know when that started." She thought about the wagon wheel on the first day, the cracked axle she'd bound together with rope and gotten moving again. She thought about $40 and a flour sack and a photograph of her mother and a folding knife and 10 days of paying attention. "I reckon it started when I got here," she said. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he nodded slow, the way he always nodded when he was taking something in that he meant to keep, and turned toward the house. She followed him. Behind them, the summer night was quiet. No riders, no fire, just the sound of cattle in the upper pasture and the wind through the dry grass, and something that had been wound tightly for 11 long years, very gradually, very carefully, beginning to loosen. The morning after the attack, Mei Lin wrote 2 letters. The first was to Hurst's lawyer in Stockton, a man named Aldous Price, whom she had never met, but whose careful handwriting she recognized from the documents in the crate. She laid out the stake evidence in precise sequence bearing distance reference point date discovered, and noted that 2 witnesses, Thomas Birch and a man named Crane, whose full name she didn't know, had seen her pull the stakes from the ground, and that the stakes themselves would be delivered to Mr. Price's office by hand before the court convened. She signed it. Mei Lin gave no other name and folded it clean. The second letter took her longer. She sat at the table for a while before she started it. She held the pen and looked at the grain of the wood and thought about $40 and a flour sack and the particular quality of her father's handwriting. Careful small a man who'd learned English from books, and she wrote, "Father, I am well. I am staying. Do not write back unless there is something real to say." She folded that one too, set them both beside the lamp. Hurst came in from the yard and looked at the letters and then at her. He didn't ask. She said, "Your lawyer needs the stakes today." "Tommy's already writing." "There's a letter with the stakes. For Price. Explains the documentation." He looked at the second letter. "And the other one." "My father." He sat down across from her, said nothing. "He made a transaction," she said. "I'm changing the terms of it." She folded her hands on the table. "I am not going back." Hurst held her gaze. His expression was steady, in the way it always was when something was costing him effort to keep level. "You don't have to decide that because of what happened last night," he said. "I know that. I'm deciding it because of every night before last night." She looked at him straight. 10 days, Caleb. 10 days, and I know this land better than I knew anything in Sutter Creek. I know where the weak fence posts are, and where the water runs shallow in August, and which cattle drift toward the ravine if the east gate is left open. She paused. "And I know that the workshop your father built on the south side of the main house has been sitting empty for 11 years, and it has exactly the right light for woodworking in the afternoon." He was very still. "I noticed it yesterday," she said, "when I was reinforcing the southeast corner. Workbench, tool hooks, good wood storage. No one's been in it in years." She held his gaze. "I'd like to use it. If that's something you'd agree to." He looked at her for a long moment. Something was working in his face, moving underneath the steady surface. "You'd like to use my father's workshop," he said. "I'd like to build things in it." She kept her voice even. "Things that last. Like I've always wanted to." "Yes," he said. Quiet and immediate without negotiation. She nodded. Picked up the pen. Put it down again. "The court," she said. "What time?" 2 o'clock. Price will meet us there." "Us." "I'd like you to be there, if you're willing." He paused. "Your documentation, your testimony. Price thinks it changes the case significantly." She thought about standing in a Stockton courtroom and saying what she'd found and where she'd found it, and Denton Cross looking at her across a courtroom the way he'd looked at her everywhere else, like furniture, like something that didn't count. She thought about how wrong he'd been every single time. "I'm willing," she said. The courtroom in Stockton was smaller than she'd expected, and warmer, the summer heat building in the closed space by the time they arrived. Price was a compact man with sharp eyes and the organized bearing of someone who spent his life managing chaos at close range. He shook Hurst's hand. He shook Maylin's hand. He looked at her documentation of the stakes for 30 seconds and then looked up. "This is excellent," he said. "This is precise in a way that Cross's people are going to have a very hard time disputing." "It's accurate," she said. "Down to the foot." "How did you learn to—" "My father almost lost his shop," she said. "I paid attention." Price made a sound that was somewhere between approval and relief, and went to find his seat. Cross was already there across the room. He had 2 lawyers and a man she didn't recognize, the assessor she guessed from the way he was holding a folder with the care of someone carrying something he knew was being watched. Cross looked at Hurst when they came in. He did not look at Maylin. She sat down, folded her hands, breathed slow and steady, and counted to 4. The judge was a woman of about 60, with a face that had spent a great deal of time making decisions, and showed it, not hard, but settled. She looked at the room over her reading spectacles, and called the session to order with the manner of someone who had dealt with land disputes before, and was not impressed by them on principle. Cross's lawyer went first. He was smooth and unhurried, and he laid out the survey discrepancy claim with the practiced ease of a man who'd rehearsed it many times. The east boundary markers, the alleged measurement error in the original 1849, filing the assessor's report that had been filed that morning, confirming the discrepancy. Maylin listened to every word. She heard where the lie was constructed, the exact point where the manufactured numbers diverged from Charles William Hurst's actual field measurements. She made a note on the paper in her lap. Price presented the field notes. The judge reviewed them. Then Cross's lawyer said, "The documentation presented by the respondent relies on measurements taken 40 years ago by a man who is no longer available to confirm them." The claimant's survey is current, professionally conducted, and filed with the county. Filed 2 days ago, Price said. After 11 years of the claimant attempting to acquire this property by purchase, the timing is relevant. The timing is standard process. The timing, Price said, is the least of the claimant's problems this morning. He looked at the judge. If it please the court, I'd like to present physical evidence of boundary tampering recovered from the respondent's property. He set the 2 stakes on the table. The room changed. It was subtle, a shift in the quality of the air, the slight repositioning of bodies. Cross's lawyer looked at the stakes with the controlled expression of a man who has encountered something unexpected and is calculating very fast. Cross looked at the stakes. Then Cross looked at Mei Lin. She met his gaze, held it, did not look away. Price spoke for 6 minutes. He described the location of the stakes, the bearing and distance from the established reference points, the date of discovery, and the 2 witnesses present at recovery. He presented her documentation. He presented her written analysis of how the stake placement corresponded precisely to the claimed boundary line in Cross's fraudulent survey. The claimant's survey does not contain a measurement error, Price said. It contains a manufactured discrepancy that was physically planted on the respondent's property after the original survey was filed. That is not a dispute about historical documentation. That is criminal fraud. The silence in the courtroom was complete. Cross's lawyer said after a moment, "Your Honor, the source of this alleged evidence is an employee of the respondent, a foreign national with no standing in this court and no formal survey training whose documentation cannot be verified by any independent." She verified it herself, Price said, using the same reference points that appear in the original 1849 field notes. The split boulder, the lone juniper, and the Morrison Foundation, all 3 still standing, all 3 measurable, all 3 confirming the same boundary line that Charles William Hearst recorded 40 years ago. He paused. If the claimant's survey were accurate, it would match those reference points. It does not. It matches instead the location of stakes that were placed on the respondent's land after this dispute began. The judge looked at the stakes. She looked at the documentation. She looked at the assessor who had stopped holding his folder with any particular confidence. The claimant's survey, she said, was filed this morning. Yes, Your Honor, Cross's lawyer said, after the respondent's emergency motion was filed yesterday. The timing is, I heard your position on the timing. She took off her spectacles, put them back on, looked at Cross directly for the first time. Mr. Cross, do you have anything to add? Cross stood. Mei Lin watched him stand, watched him look at the room, the judge, the lawyers, the stakes on the table. Hearst sitting straight in his chair, and she watched the calculation happening behind his eyes, the rapid and brutal inventory of what he had left to play. He had nothing left to play. He sat back down. No, Your Honor, his lawyer said. The judge ruled in 40 minutes. The survey claim was dismissed. The emergency motion was granted. The original field notes were entered into the permanent county record as the authoritative boundary documentation for the Hearst land grant. The physical evidence of stake tampering was referred to the county sheriff for investigation of fraud. When it was done, Price turned to Mei Lin and said, "That was the cleanest documentary case I've seen in 12 years of land law." She said, "Your client's father kept excellent records." He did, Price said, "but somebody had to know how to read them." Outside on the courthouse steps, the summer heat was enormous and honest, and Hearst was standing at the bottom with his hat in his hands, looking at nothing in particular, and she came down to stand beside him. He said, "Cross will appeal." "Let him," she said. "The record is clean. He's got nothing to appeal with." He could file criminal charges against Tommy and Crane for interfering with his men last night. He could. She looked at him. But his men came onto your property at night with torches. I reckon a jury would take a particular view of that. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Thank you." She looked at him sideways. "For what, specifically?" "For—" He stopped, looked at his hat, looked back at her. for everything that happened after that wagon wheel broke. She thought about the flour sack and the $40 and her father turning his back before the dust had settled. She thought about 10 days that had rearranged something fundamental in the architecture of what she expected her life to look like. "The wagon wheel was already cracked before I got to it," she said. "I just tied it together well enough to finish the trip." "That's what you do," he said. That's the whole of you, Maylin. You see what's cracked and you figure out how to make it hold." She looked at him. His face was doing the unguarded thing fully and completely in broad daylight in front of the Stockton courthouse, and he wasn't pulling it back. "Caleb," she said. Her voice was steady. She'd decided to be steady. "We should get back. The north herd needs moving to the upper pasture before evening, and Tommy can't do it alone." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "We should." They rode back. 3 days later, Whitfield found the stolen cattle. Not all 68 were gone for good, sold off fast somewhere across the county line, but 52 of them were in a cross-owned pasture 20 miles south, identifiable by Hearst's brand, and the sheriff who'd been investigating the fraud complaint was highly motivated to be thorough, and Cross's 2 hired men from the Ravine attack were significantly more talkative when facing a rustling charge than they'd been when facing nothing at all. Hearst came back from the sheriff's office that afternoon and told her. She was in the workshop. She'd been in the workshop every afternoon for 3 days working with the tools his father had left, good tools, well-balanced, the kind of tools that belonged to a man who understood that the quality of what you made depended on the quality of what you made it with. She was building a shelf. Simple, clean-jointed, solid. The kind of thing she built when she needed to think, because building and thinking had always happened in the same part of her. Hearst stood in the doorway and watched her work and told her about the cattle. She kept her hands moving, smoothing, checking the joint, feeling for the gap that wasn't there. 52 back, she said, by the end of the week. And Cross. Sheriff's filing charges for the rustling. The fraud referral from the judge adds to it. He paused. He's not going to come back from this. Not legally, not financially. She set down the plane, turned to face him. "How do you feel?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Like I've been carrying something for 11 years and just put it down," he said. "And my arms don't know what to do." She understood that. She understood it specifically and completely. "You could fill them with something else," she said. The words came out quieter than she'd intended, more direct. She heard them land in the space between them and felt the warmth come up in her face, and did not look away because she had decided weeks ago that she was done with the practice of looking away. He crossed the workshop in 4 steps. He didn't reach for her. He stopped an arm's length away and looked at her the way he looked at everything he was serious about, fully, carefully taking the full measure of it. "I owe you something," he said. "You don't owe me anything." "I do." He reached into his shirt pocket, set something on the workbench between them. 4 $10 bills. "Your father's price," he said. "Returned to you, not to him. To you." She looked at the money, looked at him. "I'm not a transaction," she said. "No." His voice was very quiet. "That's exactly why it goes to you." She picked up the money. Held it. $40, the number her father had put on her. The number that had started all of this. She folded it once precisely and put it in her pocket. "I'm going to buy lumber with it," she said. "For the workshop." Something broke open in his face. Full and real, nothing held back. "That seems right," he said. She looked at the shelf she'd been building, looked at the tools on the wall. His father's tools arranged in order of size, the same way the tools in the main cabin had been arranged on the day she arrived. A man who kept things ordered. A man who kept things in their right place. "Caleb," she said, "what did your father build this workshop for?" He looked around the room. Something in the looking was fond and tired and old, the way you look at something that has been waiting a long time. "He built it for my mother," he said. "She made furniture, before she got sick." He paused. "She died the same year he filed the land grant. He finished the workshop anyway. Said the land needed it even if she didn't get to use it. The silence was long and full. "He was right," Mei Lin said. She picked up the plane and turned back to the shelf. Her hands knew what they were doing, even when the rest of her was still catching up. She heard him sit down on the bench behind her. Not leaving. Not watching over her. Just present. The way he was present at the stove, at the table on the porch step, not demanding, not directing, just there. Taking up his corner of the space, without apology, and without crowding. She worked for a while in that quiet. Then she said, without turning, "I wrote to my father. I know, you mentioned it. I told him I was staying." She fitted the joint and pressed it home with her palm. Perfect. No gap. "I didn't explain why. He wouldn't have understood the explanation." "What would you have said if he'd understand?" She thought about that. About the wagon wheel and the burned barn and the courtroom and the workshop and $40 turned into lumber. "I'd have said that I found a place where what I can do is what's needed," she said. "Where the broken things are worth fixing." She paused. "And where the man who owns the land doesn't think the land is more important than the person standing on it." She heard him behind her. The quality of his stillness was different now. "Mei Lin," he said. She set the plane down, turned. He was standing. He'd moved without her hearing it, and he was close, and his face was completely open, the 11-year tiredness in it, and the 11-year stubbornness, and something younger than either of those things that she thought might have been there all along, under the careful management and the long-distance watching. "I put an advertisement in a paper," he said. "Looking for someone to help run this place. I told myself that's what I needed." He looked at her steadily. "I reckon what I actually needed was someone who would run into a burning barn without being asked." She looked at him. "That's a dangerous quality in a person." "It is," he agreed. "Turns out it's also the one I can't do without." She felt it, that thing she'd been naming carefully for weeks, filing away, keeping at a safe distance because she was thorough, and because she didn't commit to things she wasn't sure of. She felt it settle, like a joint fitted right, like a post sunk deep enough to hold. "I'm not leaving," she said. "I told you that." "I know you're not leaving." His voice was steady. "I'm asking you to stay. That's a different thing." She held his gaze for a long, full moment. "The workshop," she said, "and a fair wage for the land work. And no one tells me what I can and can't build. Yes to all three. And you stop pretending to be surprised when I'm right about something." Something broke across his face, full and real, the smile she'd been watching try to happen for weeks, finally all the way there. It changed everything about him. "That one," he said, "might take some practice." "I've got time," she said. She picked up the plane and turned back to the shelf. Behind her, she heard him exhale slow, deep, the sound of a man who has been holding something for a very long time and has finally genuinely set it down. Later that evening, Tommy moved the north herd to the upper pasture, and Crane checked the south fence, and the summer night came on slow and warm and full of insect sound, and Mei Lin stood at the door of the workshop with sawdust on her hands, and looked at what she'd built that day, a solid shelf, square and clean, the joints fitted without gap. Her first thing. Her first real thing, built with good tools, in good light, in a space that had been waiting 11 years for someone to put it to use. She heard Hurst's boots on the ground behind her. He stopped beside her and looked at the shelf. "That'll hold," he said. "I know it will," she said. "I built it." He looked at the shelf for another moment. Then he looked at her sideways in the evening light with the open expression and the almost smile, and he said nothing else, and neither did she, because there was nothing left to say that the shelf didn't already say for them. $40 had bought her father 60 cards and a quiet conscience. It had bought Mei Lin a workshop and a valley, and a man who had looked at her rough hands on the first day and seen exactly what they were, not a burden, not a transaction, not someone else's problem, redistributed. Capable, reliable, worth more than the paper her father had signed. She had not been thrown away. She had been aimed by accident, or by something that worked like grace, directly at the place she was always supposed to land, standing on ground that held with sawdust on her hands and $40 in her pocket, and the full weight of everything she'd built pressing solid and permanent against her palms. She had chosen this, and that single fact which no one could file away, and no court could dispute, and no man with a torch and a land claim could burn, was the only thing that had ever truly belonged to her. It always would.